Good evening, folks. Good morning. Good afternoon. Whenever you may be watching this, welcome to this week's Joko conversation. Although this week it'll be less than a conversation and more of a monologue. I am Brother Youssef, a member of the Joko, a poet, a published poet, a professor of composition, creative writing and literature, a scholar of cultural studies, with a concentration in the Black arts movement here in Los Angeles, and particularly the performing arts. My partner and comrade Tasha will not be joining us tonight. She's not feeling well. So, I encourage you to send positive energy, positive thoughts, positive prayers if you're a praying person in her direction, as she's resting up, conserving her energy and recuperating and rehabilitating. And do expect her to be back with us next week, Thursday. And as she often does, let me do tonight. And that is, acknowledge that what we do in the tradition of our ancestors, and we honor our ancestors, our direct line ancestors, those ancestors whose names we do not know. As members of the Joko, our African ancestry. And we know a fundamental of the African worldview. Our ancestors and the beautiful ones yet to be born are members of the village, right? They are with us. And so we honor them, and we honor them always. And we also honor the ancestors of this land where we do this work, the work of the Joko. We specifically, in what is now called the city of Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Basin, the unceded lands of the Tongvakish people. We honor their ancestors, and we honor their contemporary struggle for liberation. Free the land back worldwide. And so with that, let's get into tonight's topic. Looking at the news of this last week, and in some ways picking up where we left off last week, when Tasha and I were discussing the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and the way in which it is just one more symptom of the social collapse in the United States. Tonight, I want to focus on, what's happened in the subsequent week and the way in which the regime in this country the empowered right wing of this country, the Republican Party, which is to say the MAGA Republican Party, and its various factions, the Heritage Foundation faction, the Christian Nationalist, there's certainly overlap there, the Federalist Society, the paramilitary groups like the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, all the various parts of its coalition. A coalition which I just saw some numbers on the other day, and I apologize for not being able to name the source. How? Yeah, I can give a guess. It might have been the Farm to Tabor channel, and the creator there might have been sharing the demographics of the MAGA movement. And I bring it up because what she demonstrates, and yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the Farm to Tabor channel. And what she demonstrates is the overwhelming whiteness of the MAGA movement. And I'm ballparking it now. Something like 73 to 74% are white, with I think 10% described self-described as Latin, 3% Black, 3% Asian. So if you do the math there, right, that's what, 16. So 84, right? Maybe. And there's that percentage of those who don't identify. So anyway, you get a sense of the whiteness of MAGA, right? And so what's empowered right now, the character of the right wing movement in the United States that is fully empowered through Donald Trump's regime. Farm to Tabor, that is the channel to check out, and especially if you want to keep up with the agricultural news and its impact on our economy, etc. Farm to Tabor, shout out. So tonight, right, as we want to pick up, or as I'm picking up on really where we left off with the what the assassination signals, and then the subsequent week. So for this week, right, have this very grandiose writerly title, right? The political hagiography of Charlie Kirk, the manufacture of a fascist martyr to punish us all. And the original title was A Christian Martyr to Punish Us All. But as I was trying to prepare the title, there were too many words, right, or really too many characters, right? So I consolidated Christian nationalist to fascist. And I feel comfortable doing that because the Christian nationalist movement is a fascist movement, or at the very least, fascistic in its aims and really in its content. So and I thought, let me take a minute to talk about the title, right? So why hagiography? And being very intentional, right? The writing of the saints, right? This is um, a traditional term, a Greek root word borrowed into English to describe the writings of the lives of the saints from the early Christian centuries, right, or the early centuries of the Christian movement, um, and Christian culture, Christian practice, the Christian religion, the writings of and that's essentially what it means, right? The writings of the holy, writings of the saints. The And these lives of the saints are um, what's the word I'm looking for? They have agendas, right? That they are written with agendas. They aren't histories. They aren't histories. They aren't biographies, and particularly in the way that modern readers think of biography. They are, the myths and legends of these holy individuals, which does not mean in some of these, ancient writings that there aren't elements of, truth, certain true details, but they are not written to be those types of histories, right? They are written to present the saints as exemplars of of Christian life, of the Christian life, of the practice, the holding and the practice of Christian faith, and Christian charity, and etc. And so this is, in this week plus, there's been a concerted effort by the U.S. right and its many national and international media platforms, and of course the bully pulpit, if I can use the cliche, of the White House itself, recasting Charlie Kirk as something like a saint. There have been these calls to treat him as a military hero, though he was never in the military. The call to fly the flags at half mast, when Donald Trump signed an executive order so that the half mast flag to honor the late President Jimmy Carter would be flown at full mast to honor his inauguration. Right? The military honors, and the way in which the body was moved from Utah to Arizona, and the accompaniment of the vice president, all the way up to the vice president and the deputy chief of the vice president co-hosting Charlie Kirk's podcast, and inviting White House officials, on, most notably, Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. And of course, right, over the week, there has been this spectacle of outrage and performance of grief, around the around Charlie Kirk's assassination. And here is the pretext that the right wing has been waiting for to further intensify the crackdown on an open society. Certainly, a crackdown on anything that they see as political opposition, um, and a a monopoly, tightening the monopoly on power, as right now, right in this political cycle of the United States, in which the general population really so disgusted by the political choices that in the last political or the last presidential election a year ago, the folks who really made the difference were the folks who chose not to vote because they were just so disgusted. And understandably, though I always remember, some comments of a former colleague of mine, when he was president, I think at the time, or past president of the academic senate at Santa Monica College, where I teach, the where he would say in votes in the academic senate that those of you who are abstaining, your abstention is in its effect a vote for the winner, right? So here we are in the mess we're in, because really the fecklessness and the collapse, the crisis of the entire political system, excuse me, and the political class in the United States that has empowered this move toward fascism, authoritarian, uh, hoods off, mask off capitalism, parasitic crony capitalism. And I know some commentators have called it some kind of socialism coming out of the White House because of these deals that somehow the White House is cutting with businesses to get a percentage that goes into the U.S. Treasury. But that ain't socialism, right? Where's the distribution, right? How's that being invested into the society? No, that's just another form of crony capitalism. So in this spectacle of outrage and this performance of grief, we see the attack on free speech, and again, it's the way in which it's been intensified. Excuse me. Now, this is already an intensification that's emerging out of the fertile ground that had been prepared by the Biden administration in its crackdown on free speech, anti-colonial free speech that dared to question the U.S. and NATO's motives for supporting the Ukraine, and suppressing any discussion of the previous 8 years, back to 2014, and the engineering of the Maidan coup, the Maidan Square coup, that toppled a democratically elected president in Ukraine, very much embedded with, and that is to say, the coup engineers and operatives on the ground in the Ukraine, very much embedded with neo-Nazi, far-right, avowedly fascist, banderist militias, and thinkers and politicians, and who are still very much embedded in the current Ukrainian government. And any conversation about whether Russia was going to sit by as NATO comes up to its borders. So any discussion of any precursors to Russia's incursion um, into the eastern Ukraine, into the Donbass, that Russian-speaking part of Ukraine, which had been um, in armed conflict with Kiev over that 8 years, um, in resistance to the coup government and governments that followed. Already primed that ground. And then this, following the Hamas action on that October 7th, and then the ongoing Israeli genocidal attacks following the October 7th action, suppression of any support for the Palestinians or challenges, right, to the Zionist narrative. So this ground was prepared for a Trump regime coming in ready hot, right, to intensify that free speech. And of course, we see it everywhere. And in this moment in particular, right, around this hagiography that is being built around Charlie Kirk and the pretext that is being deployed, people are losing their jobs. Right? Lots of people are losing their jobs for things as mild or straightforward as just sharing Charlie Kirk's own words, and his own words condemn him. And his own words, as I saw a creator make the point the other day, that this might have been, what's his name, Texas Paul might have made this comment. The words are, they're even worse in context, right? Folks say, well, if you're taking them out of context, they're even worse in context. But that, some of that is being scrubbed. And folks just posting his words and across all sectors of society. So we know most recently, right, and the most, I guess one might say, spectacular of these is the suspension of Jimmy Kimmel and the Jimmy Kimmel Show by the Disney Corporation, who was the owner of the ABC network. But that's just one of many, right? A young Black woman was arrested. A college student, I believe at Texas Tech, was arrested for her free speech. Whatever her comments were about whatever they were, they weren't positive enough for whomever, and so she was arrested for her speech on Texas Tech. So we see the promises that have been made, right? The number of already professors, teachers, everyday employees, entertainers, who are losing their job or being threatened or being threatened to be doxxed, having all their stuff put out on the internet, all their information, and of course it is happening. And we should not take it lightly that immediately after the assassination, without any knowledge or information, without any investigation, the president and those around the president, his surrogates in the administration, his surrogates in the mass media landscape, the social media landscape, were already describing the killer as a leftist, a trans leftist even, and declaring war on the left, and that should not be taken lightly. These assertions of leftist violence, leftist terror, are just asserted without evidence, without reference to any specific events. They are just routinely repeated, right? That somehow it is the left wing, however they define it, however it's being defined, that is at the source of political violence um, in this society. A society in which a society that is itself right, political violence, right? The United States is political violence. As a settler colonial state, it is political violence. And it deploys policy as a form of political violence. Political violence has been a constituent aspect of the U.S. experience in small and large ways. Now, I, for one, have not watched the video that's gone viral of Kirk actually being shot because I don't need to see that, right? I don't need to see a human being's life taken out. Though I know, Kirk himself, right? And this, and I think people have lost their jobs for this, for sharing this. But Kirk himself, made that claim that in order to save, the Second Amendment, it's worth it, not might. He asserted it is worth it that some innocent lives are lost every year. Though I don't know that I would characterize Charlie Kirk as innocent. I am not one of the hagiographers writing the life of his sainthood. The So it isn't a question of applauding or condemning in this moment the political violence, but recognizing what that political violence represents, and what's happening in this country right now, and of course, that what that impact will be for the world, because the United States is still big enough to, sneeze and the whole world catches a cold. The this claim of left wing violence, and I keep, okay, well, it's not making the news. And if it isn't making the news, is that because they don't want to share examples, right, that other leftists might use? I mean, I'm not sure what violence they're talking about, and I have a sense that they are stretching the meaning of left-wing violence to actually mean protest and demonstration. And then in those cases where there's some property damage during demonstrations that may be happening, and that property damage is a far cry from the number of lives and damage done to people and animals by the true source of most of the terrorism, domestic terrorism in the United States. And that is the right wing, despite the president, despite Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance asserting the existence of left wing terror cells disrupting social life here in the United States. Despite all that, the research, and we know how much animosity this regime has toward research, but the research shows just the opposite, right? That most of what is being defined as terrorism, domestic terrorism, political violence, is coming from the right wing. So let me share my screen with you. So I want to share a couple of things with you. First, let's see here. Um, let's share this one first. Yeah, let's share this one first. So this is from something, as you see, called The Conversation, Academic Rigor, Journalistic Flair. And it came out, I think, just yesterday. Yes, I think it just came out yesterday. Right wing uh, right wing extremist violence is more frequent and more deadly than left wing violence. What the data shows. And this has been consistent for a while now, what the data shows. Um, what this article doesn't do, or at least I didn't find, was share a graph, a nice visual of it. But um, so here, defining political violence. This article relies on some of our research on extremism, other academic research, federal reports, academic data sets, and other monitoring to assess what is known about political violence. Support for political violence in the US is spreading from extremist fringes into the mainstream, making violent action seem normal. And the extreme is the mainstream right now, right? The extreme is in the White House. The extreme is the Speaker of the House. The extreme is the Senate Majority Leader. The extreme is the majority on the Supreme Court. We should not kid ourselves. Threats can move from online rhetoric to actual violence, and we're seeing that, posing serious risk to democratic practices. Right? Domestic, I'm going to skip down a little bit. Domestic violence is defined by the FBI and Department of Homeland Security, as violence or credible threats of violence intended to influence government policy or intimidate civilians for political and ideological purposes. This general framing, which includes diverse activities under a single category, guides investigations and prosecutions. So using that definition, based on government and independent analyses, right? So there's corroboration there between government numbers and independent numbers. And I'll take this moment then to say that this regime knows that. That is why they have just, within the last few days, pulled down from the Department of Justice website, the National Institute of Justice Research report that confirms that right-wing terrorism is the leading form of terrorism in this country by far and the most deadly. And indeed, most of what is called left-wing terrorism is property damage. They scrubbed it from their website, right? And in fact, this whole thing, I can't help but think about George Orwell's 1984 as this NIJ research and what it tells us about domestic terrorism in the United States, namely that it's primarily a right-wing problem, down the memory hole, right? Those of you that remember Winston Smith's job, what was it, the Ministry of Truth, ironically named, right? As this regime is good at doing, as the right wing has been doing for some time. And, the story goes down the memory hole. Erase that report that disagrees with the narrative as the data continually controverts the White House narrative, the Republican House majority narrative, the Senate narrative. So based on government and independent analyses, right-wing extremist violence has been responsible for the overwhelming majority of fatalities, amounting to approximately 75 to 80% of domestic terrorism deaths since 2001, right? So this last 24 years, that's a generation, right? Of 75 to 80%. Okay. Um, Now, again, that's coming from the Conversation, an independent journal using both government and independent sources, right? And again, it promises academic rigor with the journalistic flair in its writing. The So let me share another one with you. Let's see here. Um, Here we go. Now this one comes from an independent source. Oh, what's happening here? Okay, that's not gonna let me share. I think it wants to say no. So you tell me I have to use the other one. Oh, I know what to do. All right, I'll get back there. Oh, am I still sharing? It shouldn't be. Okay, good. Sorry, folks. So I'm fumbling around. As you know, I'm still in. Oh, that's what happened. Okay, good. So now let me share with you from a journal called uh, Profilus. There we go. Profilus. So let's see what Profilus has to say. Again, and this was from the 14th, right? So what this just came out Sunday. And Profilus, they are worth. Well, they too, they're similar. They're a research outfit, right? They're primarily a research and marketing outfit who also publishes, um, academic level, well researched um, information, right? And the actual company, this is their, I guess you might say, that their journalistic or their periodical face, you might say. Okay, so right-wing extremists drive majority of U.S. political violence. And again, they start out repeating what the Conversation piece said. Both federal assessments, right? So again, they're the federal government's own research and independent research reveal that the majority of political violence in the United States is attributed to right-wing individuals and groups. The Center for Strategic and International Studies found that right-wing extremists were responsible for approximately 67% of extremist-related terrorist plots and attacks between 2015 and 2020. So that 5-year period. And remember, the other one was looking at a 21-year period, right? And it's high as 75 to 80%. The And it should be noted, that this 5-year period is the period of Donald Trump's first run for office and his first presidency, even with the political unrest of the summer of 2020. The US, or rather in the US, right-wing violence still way um, outsizes what might be called left-wing violence. And again, most of what could be described as violent during the 2020 uprisings around police and opposing police violence, state violence through the police, was property damage by and large. And when individuals were being hurt, that was primarily protesters. The landscape. Okay, so let's see. Measuring political violence in the United States by ideological alignment, right-wing actors dominate incidents of politically motivated violence. Political violence in the U.S. refers to violent acts motivated by political beliefs, ideologies, or partisan affiliations. These range from hate crimes and extremist attacks to targeted assassinations and large-scale terrorism. And I'll go ahead and interject here that even in those periods, like the contemporary period, where we've had a spike in anti-Asian hate crimes and anti-Jewish hate crimes, anti-Black hate crimes still outpace them, as that's sort of the everyday hatred of the United States. To continue, data compiled by government agencies and research institutions show that domestic extremism constitutes an enduring national security concern. And that security concern, again, comes from within the House, within the right-wing House, which is what Jimmy Kimmel got fired for pointing out, right? Or suspended, let's say. He is not fired, he's suspended. All right, so I'm not trying to read the entire, but I'm just trying to share with you that there are multiple sources, right, that demonstrate the lie, put the lie to the narrative coming out of the White House as it is looking to justify its crackdown on what it identifies as leftist organizations, activism, organizing, funding. And what it describes as left is pretty much anything that disagrees with it, and certainly from the center, probably the center right and leftward. So none of us should feel safe. Let's be clear about that if you're in opposition to this regime at all. But I have one more to share with you that looks at some specific numbers about how deadly the right wing has been for a long time as we endure this narrative around so-called left-wing violence in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination, as they accuse people of insensitivity while they themselves make gross use of the man's death for political power. Let's see. Yes, here. How about this? The deadly arithmetic the deadly arithmetic of right-wing violence. Let's see. Let's bring that up. What are you doing? That's what you're doing. Okay, there we go. The deadly arithmetic of right-wing violence. Republicans exploit Kirk's death while ignoring a decade. That same 2015 to 25 is the last article. So that's 67% of political violence as counted by that article, using federal numbers and independent research. Republicans exploit Kirk's death while ignoring a decade of far-right carnage. Put together here, this is open letters by Merceau and Patrice Merceau on Substack. So let's just look at some of these numbers. These are people already killed by right-wing activists. 2025, which is not over, right? 2 killed. Now we're going to discount what we might call the administrative deaths that are going to result from the massive cuts that are coming out of this regime through the abomination that is Doge. And speaking of abomination, the big abominable bill. But through right wing terrorist attack, the two the Democratic state representative, Miss Melissa Horton, and her husband, and of course the other state member who was shot but survived. So two killed already in 2025, and that might be an undercount, or as more knowledge needs to come forward. 2023, 20 killed. Did I skip 2024? 13 killed in 2024. Right? 8 by white supremacists, 5 by anti-government extremists, however that is defined. 20 killed in 2023, all tied to right-wing extremism. Let's see. Among the dead were victims of the Jacksonville Dollar General shooting, where a white supremacist murdered 3 black shoppers. One incident targeted immigrants, LGBTQ plus people, and law enforcement. Because as again, sort of the irony of the right in this country, both loves police, but also sees them as agents of the state, and so will attack them. 2022, 25 killed. Right? The Buffalo Supermarket Massacre, the Club Q nightclub, and then additional shootings and assaults, all rooted in far-right ideology. 2021, 29 killed. 2020, 17 killed. 2019, 45 people killed. And again, so I don't want to leave unremarked, right? So we are here, 21 through 24. It's the Biden administration, but a Biden administration with an energized right wing, because again, these are right wing deaths, operating under the or maybe I should say incentivized and encouraged by the commitment to the lie that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. He was just beaten. And how was he beaten? Because voting was made easier, and the lesson was learned from the pandemic that you can make it easier for people to vote and to vote legally and legitimately. And the lesson learned was, so let's not do that anymore, right? Make voting harder. And so that's exactly what the right wing set out to do administratively, right? Structurally. But in the meantime, that energized group of people, many of whom may have been at the January 6th insurrection, or certainly are would consider themselves probably comrades of the January 6th, 2021 insurrection at the Capitol. You had 4 years to stew and to organize, and look at that: 29, 25, 20, 13. At least it was going down. Now here we are again, the Trump presidency, the first one, right? 17 killed. Despite the pandemic, extremist killings continued. Every murder carried out by far-right extremists, including anti-government militants who attacked police and security personnel, and white supremacists targeting minorities. The deadliest case, El Paso, Walmart massacre, where white supremacists murdered 23 Latinos in an explicitly anti-immigrant attack. And of course, being Latin does not mean being an immigrant. It probably means more often than not being indigenous to the very land. Other killings included synagogue and mosque plots and multiple far-right ambushes. 81% of extremist killings that year were committed by white supremacists, the right wing. 50 killed in 2018. The highest extremist death toll of the decade, 2 years into the Trump administration. the Pittsburgh Tree of Life synagogue, so the school shootings, additional attacks on Black, Muslim, and immigrant communities, all tied to the far right. 37 killed, 27 in, rather 37 killed in 2017. A year defined by racist and anti-government violence. Donald Trump's first year of office. The most infamous attack, the Charlottesville car ramming, where Heather Heyer was murdered during the anti-racism rally. 2016, 70 killed. During the election year, deadliest single extreme attack in modern U.S. history, the Pulse nightclub massacre, where 49 people were killed in an Islamist-inspired shooting targeting LGBTQ plus people. And let's be clear, that's right-wing Islam, right? Wahhabism, that is right-wing Islam. So it's still right-wing, just a different religious fascism. Beyond the outlier, all other extremist murders were committed by far-right extremists, including white supremacists. So again, I consider it right-wing because that is a right-wing practice of Islam. And then 2015, the campaign year, right, or the beginning of the campaign, when Trump is first going to come down that elevator spouting, racist spew over our ears. And of course, the previous 8 years, the machinations and incitement of the Tea Party, right? But, we're the Opens letters just looking at the 10 years. So 2 defining tragedies, 70 killed in 2015 alone. The Charleston Church Massacre, 9 Black parishioners murdered by white supremacists, and the San Bernardino terrorist attack, 14, again, killed by Islamic extremists. Excuse me, even with jihadist attacks included, which again, I'm characterizing as right-wing, the ADL notes that the far right was the most consistent source of extremist violence across that decade, mid-decade to mid-decade, 2015 to 2025, where we are now, with a few months left in the year. So they know they're lying, right? They know they're lying. Because if they weren't lying, there would be no need for them to take down the National Institute of Justice or for Justice research that demonstrates that the primary source of terrorism and political violence in the United States is coming from the right wing. But it doesn't matter, because they are committed to just, continuing to assert their talking point, their pretext for the political crackdown, the crackdown on free speech, the investigation and arrest of political opposition, even political opposition within the mainstream. So that's important to understand, right? Even within the mainstream. So I just want to, come to a close here, and just look at one more quick story, right? And the way in which so easily this regime, asserts a certain thing without any evidence. But what matters is the repetition of the lie, right? To create their own reality. The other day, as Trump it was in his office before he left for the UK, talking about flag burning and making a claim that part of the problem is you can't arrest people for flag burning because it's free speech, but there's got to be a way around that. And maybe that way around that is to arrest people for inciting violence, because when you burn a flag, fights get started. Because there was a big fight the other day. Like, okay. So it certainly hasn't been in the news about, major conflicts around flag burning. There was the U.S. Army veteran who burned a flag as a demonstration, a practice of free speech, who was arrested for his free speech. No violence other than his arrest. The than that. But I was like, okay, I'm gonna take a minute to take him as his word and look for the news, right? So let me find the news. Where's this big fight that broke out that he's talking about? When did it happen and where did it happen? He said just the other day. So I'm like, well, this should be in the news. This should be an easy search. And all I could come up with every time I searched for, a major fight after flag burning, Trump claim a fight after flag burning, was stories reasserting that burning the U.S. flag is protected free speech, and that there's been no major fight. At least it hasn't been newsworthy if it happened. So how the president found out about it and could share that and assert that, they just make stuff up, right? They just make stuff up to fit the narrative. And important to that narrative right now, to help them accomplish their political ends, is the convenient, which is a horrible thing to have to imagine, but the convenient murder of Charlie Kirk, who they can now position as a martyr for their movement. They're Christian nationalist, fascist, anti-democratic, in the name of defending freedom. Because remember, they don't talk much about democracy. They talk about freedom. Nice and vague, right? Free to rule others. Anyway, so the way in which they are weaponizing this convenient murder, and the way in which they are rewriting the life of Charlie Kirk, making him sort of a state saint and emblem for the movement going forth, for their fascist MAGA movement that cannot even abide sharing power with the other capitalist and imperialist party, the Democratic Party. So, the crisis has come to a head when the duopoly, the gentleman's agreement, the Faustian deal between the parties is, the one party has decided, nope, no thank you, we'll take all the power. And they've been planning it for a while and putting things in place and been quite methodical about it to bring us where we are now, under the regime of Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, the Christian nationalists across denominations, but especially evangelical fundamentalists and the super conservative Catholics. Bring us here. So, I had this other thought, right? This other illusion that sparked, in my mind, thinking about this moment, as I've already referenced George Orwell's 1984. And, as I've learned more about George Orwell over the years, I reference him less and less often, because even in my own reading of 1984, I was like, well, this is so clearly, whatever was presented to me as a student, right, in school, the idea of totalitarianism and authoritarianism, it was clear to me it was a critique of the Soviet Union and not just totalitarianism generally. And actually, I was thinking about doing a talk on 1984, another approach, but more on that some other time. But anyway, as I mentioned earlier, I can't help but think of the memory hole, the way in which the NIJ, or rather the Department of Justice, has scrubbed this data from its website that demonstrates the problem of right-wing terrorism, so that there's nothing to contradict the preferred narrative of the regime. But also, I think of 1984 and Comrade Ogilvy. Comrade Ogilvy, this fictional character that is created by Winston Smith as part of his job at the Ministry of Truth, the ideal, patriot, party member, sacrifices, right, for the party, for the cause, for the nation, larger than life, better than you and me, noble, or organically noble, but humble. So anyway, but purely fictional. And though Charlie Kirk was by all means a real person, and again, from my point of view, a person who has had an overall negative effect on the society at large, giving new generations of young people, preteens, teens, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, permission to be as racist, bigoted in the most old-fashioned ways, misogynistic, homophobic, and anti-democratic, anti-ecumenical. So really, and really for that influence on the young, a net negative from my point of view, right? But it's being recast as St. Charlie, right? St. Charlie Kirk, sort of the embodiment, right? All the idealism and romanticism of MAGA's notion of American Christian manhood is being projected onto Charlie Kirk, but not Charlie Kirk, the actual man, but now Charlie Kirk, the symbol of the MAGA movement, right? So, because fascists need symbols, again, it is very much a rule through spectacle, or at least the spectacle is key to their own self-image, and to the performance of fear instilling practices in the public at large. The so yeah, this upholding of Charlie Kirk, as again I want to repeat it, the embodiment in his death of the American Christian man, the ego ideal of of MAGA, some form of MAGA masculinity, so that through his canonization by the MAGA movement, the rest of us can be punished, silenced, physically attacked, etc. So we should be mindful of that going forward. And I approach this, and actually, I meant to say this earlier. You know, I titled it the way I titled it, and I wanted to zero in on these notions of the hagiography, but also on the notion of the manufacture that we see before our eyes and before our ears. This manufacture of a version of Charlie Kirk, um, to serve now as this symbol and this shield, um, and this weapon to crack down on dissent in this country and to make it okay to be a bigot, right? To be bigoted, to be a racist, to be comfortable with that, and indeed to define that as patriotism. Now, maybe that's not wrong when one thinks of Charlie Kirk as and those who support him, who supported him financially, who are of like mind, folks in the Heritage Foundation, etc. A return to the First Republic, to the white ethno state that the country was actually founded to be, though even in its founding, it was always troubled by the presence of the indigenous people on whose land, whose stolen land, the ethno republic was to be built, and the Africans who built it, whose labor and brain power and organizational skills and cultural gifts built the country. So here we are. In the same way that the claims about left-wing political violence and violence that is incited by flag burnings that aren't happening, that these are narratives being made out of whole cloth, so is this new hagiography of Charlie Kirk, a full manufacture to recreate Charlie Kirk in the image they want. I am punished the rest of us for pointing out the truth of his work. And again, he's condemned by his own words. So with that, right, I appreciate those of you who are viewing, right, who came on in to, hear me share my thoughts. Again, we are missing Tasha. Tasha, get better. We're sending positive energy, positive vibes, prayers up for your healing, your rehabilitation, your recovery. And everyone else, let's do all the things, right? If you haven't done so before, please subscribe. Help us build our subscriptions. I always laugh because many of the creators I follow, they've got like thousands of subscribers, hundreds of thousands, maybe even 1 million. And all we're trying to do is get to 200. Come on, people. Help us out. Help us get to 200. And just as importantly, please like this video, right? As we want to resist the tyranny of the algorithm. It's so right to beat the algorithm. I don't know. How do you beat the algorithm? Anyway, we need likes. So please like this and by all means share. And we look to be back next week. And I expect to not be alone. And be in conversation, at least with Tasha, and maybe we'll have a guest with us also, because we do like to bring people on, right, to have our conversations. So again, I am Youssef, Brother Youssef, Dr. W. Youssef Doucet. published poet, professor, scholar of cultural studies, and my approach tonight was really very much a cultural studies approach. At least I wanted to do that. Again, looking at the way in which these narratives are created to manufacture this martyr for the fascist movement, and was happy to share with you. I hope you found this interesting. We will see you again soon. And I'll finish the way I always like to finish, by quoting the prophet, the revolutionary, the African revolutionary, Bob Marley, Burhan Selassie, the name he took. Revelation reveals the truth. It takes a revolution to make a solution. All right? Ready for the revolution, y'all.